Talk today, how's the Vue? Overview of the Vue.js framework and where it stands relative to other JS libraries you know. First of all, quick plug is mentioned. I work at Jobber. This is our website. Get jobber.com, not jobber.com. We haven't managed to finagle jobber.com yet. Yeah, if you're interested, go check that out. I think down in the footer here, yeah, careers. So you can go take a look at the job postings we have, read a little bit about who we are as a company. Also, please feel free to grab myself or Sean afterwards and ask us what it's like to work at Jobber, or Nathan, because we like to keep our names to a minimum. So Vue.js, so this is what I'm going to be talking about. So first of all, how many people have heard of Vue.js? Okay, how many people have used Vue.js? Almost no one. Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting stat. So to get into this a little bit, again, this is myself. As far as I know, to date, I'm the only Ben Zittlau in the world. So if you search for Ben Zittlau, anything you find is Ben Zittlau is probably me, unless it's embarrassing, in which case it's not me. You can get a hold of me at Twitter, Ben Zittlau, benzittlau.com, Ben at Jobber, or you can check out my blog, Spring Launch, just a little bit of a date. I'm going to get into Vue a little bit. So one of the interesting things about Vue is it's been there in the pack. So I generally think of the three leading JavaScript kind of frameworks as Ember, Angular, React. I don't know if those are the three that would come into your head if you were asked which are the three main ones. So I was actually curious. I went and did this timeline. Can you guys see that at all?
No. Do you want me to turn down the lights?
We can solve this in a different way. Let's see if that's enough. Is that still not great? Anyone remember any of the other reveal themes? I'll just look. We're going to go with beige. So you can go view this at exchange-js-house-the-vue.herokuapp.com. I'm going to run this here instead. Hopefully everything still looks okay. Okay, is that better? All right, cool. So I went and looked at all those three frameworks and kind of their history. So if you're really into JavaScript frameworks, this is basically history of everything that's mattered. So at year 0, Jesus was born. The first one was September 2009 when Angular was announced. Second after that was Ember in 2011, and then 2013 React was open sourced. So those three have actually been around for quite a while. But what's interesting for me is that Vue actually wasn't that far behind. So Vue was originally released in February 2014, and then Vue 2.0, because really, of course, with all these frameworks, all we care about is the most recent version, was released in April 2016. And the interesting thing with Vue is while it's been around for quite a while, there's been this real upsurge in at least discussion about Vue in about the last year. So we can see right around kind of I guess mid-2015 to late 2015, it really kind of like picked up a little bit. For some reason, there seems to be a lot of interest in Japan and the US. I don't know what the story there is. But as a contrast, the one on the right side here is Angular. So we can see Angular has been on like kind of like a much more gradual curve, and it's kind of leveled off. It has a lot more kind of like global, general distributed interest, where Vue had this like big uptick much later. And again, really focused in the US and Japan for whatever reason. So the who behind Vue, you, but not the the Evan you. So It was pretty astounding to me when I looked at this. So Evan You was a developer at Google originally and was doing work in Angular back, I think, in around like 2013, 2012, which is when he started working on Vue before it actually ended up being open sourced. After that, he actually went and worked at Meteor for a while. And then in 2016, left Meteor and started working on Vue full time. And this contributions graph on the Vue GitHub is one of the most dramatic I've ever seen, where if you're not familiar with this, GitHub basically sorts it by the amount of your contributions. So you can see this is Evan You right here, and then this guy is the next highest. So it's a pretty steep fall off. Basically, it's a one-man project. He's doing like a lot of work on this and some of the other side projects, which I'll talk about later. It's backed by Vue Technologies LLC, which is his company that he's put together. I don't know if he does freelance work or stuff around that. It's not backed by any of the major players. Like React is Facebook, Angular has Google and Microsoft. At least Ember has like Yehuda Katz and the whole Rails community. Vue doesn't have a major backer like that. It's largely Evan You. So the why. So of course there were all the other three frameworks in place at the time in which he started Vue and open sourced Vue. So why did he do it? So there's two kind of key things that I call out here. So these are quotes from Evan You. So one is that he liked things about Angular, but he wanted to pull out the parts that he liked and put it into something that was lighter weight than Angular is. And then the other idea is that he wanted something that was progressive, and he gives himself credit of coining the term progressive. Progressive could mean a lot of different things. I'll talk a little bit more about what it means in his context. But basically this idea that you could take something that was existing and like start enhancing it through using Vue versus having to like build something new from scratch. Okay, let's get into the what of it a little bit. I've yapped at you a little bit, so you might be ready to see some code. So let's pull this up. So say you have this really boring sign-up form where you can go hello and you're supposed to put your name in. And what you want to do is add some more interesting behavior, some more engaging behavior to this existing DOM that you have to pull users in. I'm going to try and do some really quick live coding. If it doesn't work, I have fallbacks planned. So basically here I go new Vue. Using CodePen, I'm pulling in the Vue library if you're wondering how that magic's happening. I need to tell it what it's going to bind itself to. So I'm going to tell it's going to go to this form. And I'm going to tell it that there's going to be a name, piece of data. And right now I'm just going to give it something for free. And then in here, I'm going to go put that name. And look at that. So at this point, I now actually have Vue like connected into this existing part of my DOM. I didn't have to rewrite it. I didn't have to build it in JSX or something like that. I just took this existing page that I had. And now if we wanted to go a little bit further, of course, we probably want that to come from the actual input here that we have. So go and do that. One of the things you might have noticed is that it actually already populated. So it has this data thing connected over to here. I'm going to go make the default just a blank string. And now if I go here and I start typing, like as that user is typing in their name, we can see it like doing things, which is pretty cool. That took me about 2 seconds to do. But one of the things that's weird is we've got this like white space here, whether something's been populated or not. So I'm going to go and fix that. So I'm going to create this computed thing, which I'm going to call a padded name. Actually, we'll do this. And this is going to take return this.name. And we're going to go make this be my padded name instead of my name. So now hopefully everything's still working good. But we are going to want to return just an empty string. Actually, I can't do that because this isn't Ruby. If this.name.length equals 0, we're going to return an empty string. And then we're going to get rid of that. But if it's not empty, we're gonna concatenate in that. So now what will happen is when I go and start typing, if you can see that, when there's nothing there, it's just hello, and then when I start typing, it starts padding it. So again, that took me almost no time to take like this existing boring form that I had and just say, you know what, I want to do something more dynamic. I could do it with jQuery. Getting that working with jQuery is gonna be gross. And it took like very little time and this really nicely structured Vue thing I could just bind to it and have this nicely structured code, which is infinitely nicer than it would look if I had to do the same thing with jQuery. So that's when like Vue talks about being progressive. It's this idea that I could take an existing thing and bolt Vue onto it and start adding these behaviors in a really neat way where I'm getting a lot of the modern features that you get from a modern JavaScript framework without having to like rebuild all the existing stuff that I have. Okay, cool. That's not the one that we're using. Oh, it's because I did this. Okay, cool. So that's kind of like what Vue is. To go into a little bit more, Vue has some Angularisms. Is that large enough? Is that readable? Let's do this some more. Is that better?
Question.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Is it like a one-way or a two-way bind?
By default, one-way. So it's similar. It has like the actions up, data down type of mentality where you have one-way actions and one-way data flow. That vModel attribute that I threw in there is a two-way binding. That's basically the only two-way binding in the framework. Everything else is one-way. There's caveats to that, but yeah, basically most things are one-way except for that vModel binding, which is a two-way binding. I'm not going to mess around too much longer to try and get this larger. I don't think. I wish that was more readable. Where's that padding coming from? Left top 50%, transform. Looks like the width. Let's try this. I don't know, is that helping?
I can post a link to these after here if you want to.
Hopefully that's a little bit better. I could muck about with this for a while, but I'll give up for now. So you're gonna have to squint, pull your binoculars a little bit. I apologize for that. Hopefully what you can see here though is that it's the Vue.js template on the top and the Angular template on the bottom. And what you can probably see between those, even without pulling out your binoculars, is that they look incredibly similar. And again, like Evan Yu came from an Angular background, he came from Google working in Angular, a lot of his inspiration came from Angular, and you can see it very obviously here, in particular with the idea that the templates are effectively HTML-based templates. So you're not learning like a new template language, you're not writing JSX, you're taking HTML with some extensions built onto it. So, you know, one of the things is like being able to do the mustache curly brackets and add some data into it. And then these, what they call directives, both in Angular and in Vue, where you can iterate through. So this is going ng for let person of filtered people. This is going v for person of filtered people. So taking, you know, this filtered people array, I'm going to iterate through it and do something with each one of those things. So very like clear Angular inspiration. ReactIsms. So this is a Vue component and it has this concept of data where in that component I will initialize this data, and here I'm like initializing it to this list of people. Those people have names and they have roles, and then here I have a React component with state. So as you can see, again, they look incredibly similar. The idea of data in Vue is basically exactly the same idea as state in React. Another ReactIsm, props. So here's a Vue component. I have props, which are things that you can pass through the attributes to a component. So just like you have class equals whatever as an attribute on a normal HTML element, as you add components, you can make your own props. So this one would have a prop called filter, and here I'm saying that filter needs to be a string. So it will do validations for me to validate that whatever I'm passing into that attribute is a string. In React, it would look like this. You have to have like this kind of like a little bit more boilerplate in the React world to pass these props in and then use prop types. But you can accomplish exactly the same thing with props in React, saying I'm going to pass these things as props. They need to pass these validations. Emberisms. So one of the things that I showed really quickly when I did that live coding was this computed thing. And I won't go all the way into what computed means, but basically in Ember, they use these things called computed properties to track changes through the entire application. So if I have that input element and I make changes in it, and then I do something like that padding thing that I did, I want to like have that, the fact that this thing changed automatically earmark the fact that this thing changed so that it will re-render my browser, make it demonstrate the fact that whatever data there was has changed. So that's what computed properties do in Ember. Vue has the same idea of computed properties. It's actually really interesting. Vue uses a hybrid of both this computed property mechanism that Ember uses along with virtual DOM that React uses. If you're interested in hearing more about that, you can catch up with me at beers afterwards. I could talk about that more. But the key here is that Vue has these like computeds, and then similarly, Ember has its computed properties. Again, if you look at the React example of looking at props in Vue to props in React, there's a lot more boilerplate in the React form. Similarly, if we look at computeds in Vue to computeds in Ember, there's a lot more boilerplate going on in here in Ember. Like for example, in Ember here, I actually have to declare the other things, that this is going to be dependent on something else called filter, and it's going to be dependent on something else called people to tell Ember what it is computed based on. In the Vue stuff, I don't have to do that. It actually magically figures out for me what it is dependent on and sets that all up. And again, if you're interested in hearing more about that, I can talk about more about that later. So it has this idea that these ideas I took from React, but it made them cleaner. It took away the boilerplate. It has these ideas that I took from Ember, but it made them cleaner. It took away the boilerplate. So that's pretty neat. So then when you combine all these things, what you end up with is a Vue component. So up here, this is what they call a .vue file. So you make this like template where you put your template into it, and then you have a script tag where you put the actual JavaScript. So kind of like similar to React where you have like a single file component. In Vue, you can do these .vue single file components, which have the same capabilities that you'd expect out of a component in any of the other frameworks that you're used to working with. In here you can see all those pieces. So you can see the props in here, the data that I talked about, the computed in here. So those all pull together, all those ideas from these different frameworks pull together to allow you to do these Vue components. So one of the other really interesting things about Vue is Vue has an app. So if you notice when I did that first live coding, I did something like this bottom thing here where I went new Vue, and I gave it an element. So just a selector, and was able to bind onto the existing DOM and say, okay, this is where my app lives in the DOM. Components in Vue are actually still just instances. They're Vue instances. So a component is no different than the app. The only difference with a component is that I can't bind it to an element, because a component is going to end up wherever I kind of have that component in the markup in my app. But they are actually derived from the same class. A Vue component is actually just an extended Vue app class. So the behaviors of them look very similar. You're not learning like a different thing for like what the top level app is and how to mount it and how to bind it versus how components work. They are the same thing. So that's pretty neat in terms of how Vue's dealt with components. And if you pull all those things together, what you end up with is a really basic Vue app. So this is one that I've done in a CodePen. One of the really nice things about Vue, again, is because it doesn't require all these tool chains. All I had to do to get Vue working in a CodePen was go in here and say I wanted to use Vue, and that pulls in the Vue library. And then I can just set up a DOM and start doing things against it with Vue. So I don't need to deal with Webpack, I don't need to deal with NPM, I don't need to set up all this stuff just to start playing around with Vue. It's incredibly easy to start playing with it. I actually really highly recommend using CodePen if you do want to play around with Vue. It's really quick and easy to get going. So this is just a really stupid little app that I contrived to demo Vue. So this is just a list of people who are going to be at the June 2017 people list. I don't think I put anyone there who actually didn't show up, so that's good. And we can see that they have different roles. So Mark is the organizer, I'm a speaker, Yuan is a speaker, Sean Healy was going to be an attendee, and Abram was going to be an attendee. And here I can just go and I can filter that list down. And if we look at what's going on, I have the app here, so I have just, again, in the DOM of my application, I created this div, I gave it the ID app, and then over here in my JavaScript is where my app mounts. So I just said new Vue element app, and then I defaulted the selected filter to be all. And then to make the behavior happen, all I had to do was add this attribute, v_on_click. And in here, I can actually do an expression. So I didn't have to do any other functions or anything like that. I was literally able to just put here, selected filter equals all, selected filter equals organizer, selected filter equals speaker. And that was all I had to do to set up the behavior that when I click on these, they filter, change that selected filter. And then I'm passing that down into a component. So because I wanted to show what components look like, I created this filterable list component. We can see it using this props. So there's a prop called filter, which is being passed through here. It's being given the value that's being selected by those buttons. And here I have my data, which is that initial list of the people who are here. And then down here, I have a computed property for that filtered people. So this knows that it's dependent on the people list, and it knows it's dependent on the filter. So as soon as I change filter, it knows to go and recalculate that filtered people list and to re-render that down in the actual DOM down here. And I basically get all that stuff for free. The fact that it knows that it's dependent on those things all happens for free, that it recomputes those things and updates the DOM, it all happens for free. So that's what a really, really basic Vue app looks like. Okay, so building out to a full single page app. If you're not familiar, SPA just stands for a single page app. This idea that instead of changing pages rendered by the server, we load one page, have a full application, which is where we tend to be moving with web applications today. One of the things that if you've worked with some of these other systems, worked with an Angular and what comes with that, Ember, what comes with that, or worked with React and pulled in Flux or Redux or a router to work with React, you probably have seen that in things I've shown, there's some pieces missing. So Vue, its core, is focused on just the Vue layer, like React is focused on just the Vue layer, but they do actually have core projects that add some of those other pieces. So they have something called Vuex, I don't really know how to pronounce it. It's a play on Flux. It's inspired by Flux. You can actually use Flux or Redux with Vue, but you have to set up some of the bindings yourself. The advantage of Vuex is that it gives you those bindings out of the box. So you'll get the same ideas, like the reducers and things like that you're used to from a Flux or a Redux, but you'll get all that set up for free. And they also have a router. It looks very much like a router, like you'd expect a router from other projects to look like. You can kind of say the path, so if /foo, I want to show the component foo. If it's /bar, I want to show the component bar. You can do nested routes. You can do dynamic things where you have IDs or things like that in the URLs. Basically all the things that you'd expect from a router, they'll give you for these routers. They are core projects, so the advantage of that is that you shouldn't see where weird things where like Vue updates and like your router breaks, or Vue updates and it doesn't work with your state management thing anymore. They're all owned by Vue, so they will all be like working well together. So to close things out, popularity contest. Okay, so these 4 numbers, I'm just going to call it the stars just in case you can't read those. So the top ones are about 68,000 stars. These are the GitHub stars in their repos. Second is 55,000 stars. Third is 24,000 stars. And fourth is 18,000 stars. So just shout it out. What do you think the top one is? Vue? Okay. What do you think the second one is? Angular? Okay. What do you think the third one is? Anyone? Angular, Ember, okay, and what do you think the fourth one is? Okay, so the top one is React, then Vue, then Angular, and then Ember. So that was actually really surprising to me that like if you use GitHub stars and forks as a reference for like how popular a library is, Vue actually has like significant amounts of traction, not that far behind React, and actually ahead of Angular, which for me was very surprising because like when we did this poll, I bet if we asked the same question for Angular, we asked it for React, there'd be a lot higher adoption here. But clearly there's a lot of interest in this Vue project, even if it's not being maybe used as widely as these other ones are yet.
They had more downloads than React last month.
Okay. Yeah, and that's super interesting. So just some thoughts as I've looked at it. So I've been using Vue for an entirety of about a week since I started prepping this talk. So these are some of the thoughts that I have about it. There's some really, really neat features. The efforts that he's done to make it really like simplified, ripping out all the boilerplate, reducing things, and providing the same functionality that these other frameworks do in a much simpler way is really cool. There's so many cool features in here in terms of how you can do those bindings and nice things that they can do like trimming and capitalization and filters, and there's a lot of really cool features in there that I just didn't have time to talk about. Given that its 2 goals are making it very accessible to get into relative to these other frameworks and making it progressive where you can take something and progressively enhance it, I think they've accomplished those goals really well. In terms of rendering performance, it's comparable. It beats Angular 1 handily, it's comparable to Angular 2, it's comparable to React, is comparable to Ember 2. Of course, it all depends on exactly your context, but it is comparable in rendering performance to the other frameworks, which again, for a project that's basically being built by a single guy is actually very impressive. And the documentation is excellent. Like, man, their documentation is so good, it's readable, it's up to date, it's thorough. Like, it is definitely the best documentation I've seen of like any of these other projects out there, where they don't really need a massive blog ecosystem of people blogging about it, because you can just go read the documentation for the project. So that's really cool. But things I think is good for, I think it's an excellent replacement for jQuery. So again, in this case where it's like, oh, I've got this sign up form and I want to do some basic like validation on it, I'm going to throw jQuery at it, consider using Vue. Is going to be a lot nicer to work with than jQuery would be, and comparably easy to add. You just need to add one script to your page and you have Vue, you can start using it. You don't need to deal with Babel or any of the build toolchain stuff. Also, if you want to like have a project that you want other people, so maybe like Exchange's website or something like that, where you want more people to be able to come in and have it be accessible to them without having to spend an entire weekend learning new technology, I think Vue would be very good about that. For building a full single page app, I'm not sure that it's the right decision relative to something like React or Angular. Its testing support is really, really immature, which is one of the big problems with Angular 1, was dealing with like asynchronous stuff and how to test it. It doesn't have good answers for that. They say they're working on some helpers, but they're not there yet. It's got some good core projects that it provides, but there's not really a good ecosystem of strong other projects around it yet if you want things to behave slightly different. There's not, again, a big backer for it. Facebook isn't behind it, Microsoft or Google aren't behind it. So how confident can you be that this project is going to continue to have strong backing going forward? Maybe less obvious. And there aren't some really strong reference projects built on it yet. So GitLab is built on it. They have an article that I link later that they talk about that. CodeShip is built on it. But there's none of these like big, like massive sites that you use all the time that you're finding like, oh, that was built on Vue. Those don't exist yet. which just makes it maybe a little bit riskier to think of adopting for yourself. But here's my quote. At the end of the day, I liked it a lot and could see it becoming an easy to use go-to for side projects. So if I'm doing some side project on the weekend and I don't want to lose the entire weekend to setting up like React and Webpack and Babel and getting all that stuff working, I could very easily see myself just going to Vue as kind of like my go-to for having all those features that you're used to having, that you want to have without all that overhead and complexity. Yeah, resources. So again, the main Vue.js docs, which are excellent. This is also their own article comparing themselves to other frameworks. He actually collaborated with, I want to say Dan Abramov, thank you, on the React comparison to make sure that it was being fair to both sides of it. So they collaborated on that comparison. And there's comparisons to Angular, Angular 2, Ember, and a handful of others as well. Switching from React to Vue.js, which Mark shared, I actually haven't read it yet. And then again, GitLab talking about why they chose to go with Vue, CodeShip talking about that. And then I have a link to this talk, which if you're at this talk might not be that useful. Yeah, so that's the talk. So I guess questions, yeah.
Most of your examples were in sort of like straight up Node, not the ESMX or whatever. Is that like kind of a community decision? Is most of the documentation that way? Is there?
Yeah. So his big thing is avoiding those dependencies. You can write it in ES6 if you want to set up that tool chain. It does support like modules and includes and exports. All those things are there. In fact, if you look at the Vue, where did I have that again? Yeah, in here you can see that it's like module.exports, like that support is there. It has TypeScript support, so there's TypeScript definitions if you want to work in TypeScript. But the base idea is making it, again, like very easy and avoiding those dependencies on the tool chains. So he actually views that as an advantage of Vue, is that all the documentation is written in ES5, gotta always like make sure I'm not gonna say that wrong, but basically written in JavaScript that you can run directly in the browser without needing some type of compilation stuff. Okay.
Can you embed CSS in Control as well?
So embed CSS? Yeah, I just avoided that just to like simplify things. But in that Vue, that same format, you can do a style tag with your CSS. It has really good tooling for like taking all that CSS and compiling it into single files if you do want to set up that your build chain, your Webpack like build chain for it. And it can do CSS scoping like Angular can, so you can actually scope your CSS. It will inject prefixes onto the element and to all your CSS styles, so they'll only apply within that. So the support for the styling aspect of it is actually pretty strong.
We'll wrap it there. More
cool.
Questions and beers?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Ben.
Okay.
Thanks for watching. Exchange.js is Edmonton's JavaScript meetup. Subscribe for all our videos, then stay informed by following us on Twitter and meetup.com. Links in the description. Thanks to our sponsors, Jobber and Clio. Do your part to support the meetup and like and share this video. Don't forget to subscribe. See you soon.